Budget negotiations continue as a government shutdown looms, and voters may have another ballot issue in 2012. Details in Capitol Report. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Capitol Report. I'm Julie Bartkey. Budget negotiations continue. A set schedule of daily meetings between leadership and the governor displays willingness to negotiate. A lack of progress on a global budget agreement displays how polarized each side remains. However, there are some positive steps with each meeting.
For example, K-12. The governor had an $80 million price tag when he originally came in. Now you could split that. We could have come in and said, okay, well, Governor, you wanted 80 million more, here's 40 million. You could approach it from that way. In that case, we decided, you know what, Governor, we're going to give you that one. That was you said more money to K-12, no excuses, no exceptions. In the spirit of goodwill and compromise, we're going to just give you your entire number there. And along with public safety, everything you addressed in your veto letters, let's get half the budget, let's just take that off the table, done and done. And let's focus on the other half. So it's a different approach, and I think it's an important distinction because it is about the spending. And one thing we know about state government is spending too much. It has been spending too much, and it is forecast to spend too much.
Consistently said I will not sign one bill until I sign all of them. We're one Minnesota, we're one state government. I'm not going to see one group played off against another, and K-12 against Health and Human Services, and public safety against other essential critical services. It's got to be a complete solution. That's what the Constitution requires. That's what they had 5 months to do.
With 20 years in the education field, from teacher to administrator, she was recently tapped to head up the Department of Education. Please welcome to Capitol Report Commissioner Brenda Cassellius. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Commissioner, you've been in your office now for about 6 months. Let's talk first on the latest, the budget negotiations, the offer from the Republicans earlier this week to the governor. Particularly an offer that increases education $80 million more than what the current proposal is. What do you think of this latest offer?
Well, I think it's good that they are recognizing that we need to make an investment in education. They had come with about $44 million worth of cuts, and we had a modest increase of about $36 million. So I think that's a recognition there. Add $44 million and $36 million, it equals $80 million. And so I think it's a recognition that we need to be making investments in our children and in our futures.
And obviously, education is your priority. It's also a priority for the GOP and the DFL and the governor. But how are their priorities? How are all of these sets of priorities differing, and how does that create a challenge for you?
Yeah, it is challenging because we do have some differences, but we have a lot of areas that we agree. So one area of difference is around early learning. And we've just had the race to the top, and the secretary was here, and we're very interested in going for those federal dollars and leveraging that. So early learning, all-day kindergarten, priority for us. Reading is a priority for both of us. So reading by third grade and reading well by third grade is a priority. I think also innovation and rewarding excellence is a priority, and so Senator Olson and Chair Garofalo have both said that they want to reward excellence. Senator Olson wants to do that within rewarding for literacy, which I think is very commendable, and we're interested in that as well. And so, those are some areas that we agree on.
What about QComp?
QComp is an area we don't really agree on. We've capped QComp. We recognize that it does work in some districts. I'm not one who really believes that you can pay a teacher more than anything, that what they're making, give them a fair wage now, and but they're not motivated by more money. So pay for performance, I think the research is out on that, but teachers need a fair wage, and they need to be networking. The good parts of QComp are that teachers get the opportunity to network with one another and share their best practice. We do that with the Governor's Award for Excellence. So we made a proposal to recognize schools who have more than 1 year's growth. with their students, because we know if you close gaps, you need to get more accelerated growth out of students. And so we are going to recognize schools, and then they give them some dollars and incent teachers to be able to share that best practice with other schools maybe that aren't getting the same kind of results.
And another area of reform that did pass over this legislative session is alternative teacher licensure. Right. How do you implement that, and how long do you give it to see if it's working or not working?
So that was an area that was really difficult for the stakeholders to come together around for the last 3 years, and we were able to do that pretty quickly. So we were pretty proud of that compromise, and hopefully that will dictate some of the future discussions we have over the next couple weeks here. The way that we are going to do that is the Board of Teaching will be able to make some rules around the program and do some rulemaking around it, but we haven't determined how that will work. We have Teach for America already, and we'll probably use a lot of what they use because they've been so successful nationally.
Another priority, of course, is trying to close the achievement gap. Minnesota is known for having a very high achievement gap. So how do you propose doing this?
Early learning. Get a jump start on students and give them those opportunities right away. We know that from birth until 5, that is when the brain is working the most, and I think that you need to be able to close those gaps for children. You know, I'll tell you just a personal story. You know, I grew up in poverty, and my mom had my sister at 16, and that was before there was Head Start. And then she had me, and I got the opportunity to go to Head Start. I didn't struggle in school. My sister did. And we had a conversation, she and I, just about that a few weeks ago. And, you know, I just think that it really does help close those gaps.
I'd like to take that question then a step further. What about the students who are currently enrolled in school and who are maybe really young? Are we going to miss out on an entire generation here? Will this achievement gap remain where it is as these kids who are in 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade now proceed through the system?
Well, it makes it much more difficult if you don't get them before 3rd grade reading. We know the research shows that students who are reading by 3rd grade and reading well by 3rd grade absolutely have a better opportunity. Doesn't mean that, you know, you can't meet their needs, but it really takes masterful teachers. It takes being able to really work well with parents. You have to have a great school with a great academic culture where every teacher is relentless on that child, that they will master, not allowing them to do D work or giving them a D- just so that you can pass them to the next grade. You have to be relentless that they will master, and everybody in the school has to have that same attitude about every child. You have to get to the point as a teacher that you care about everybody's child the same that you care about your own.
Given the class sizes that most schools have right now and the financial concerns, is this an achievable goal?
It is. In secondary school, it's a little bit more difficult because the class sizes are a little bit bigger. And then people don't think about the class size as a class load. So when you are a secondary teacher, you have 5 classes typically, 5 or 6 classes of about 30 kids. So you can have 150 students that you're trying to keep track of. And so that's why we say you got to get them earlier. You have to get them loving learning and understanding their numbers and understanding the concepts underneath mathematics, as well as being able to read and write well. And teachers have to have the tools to be able to work with all different unique learners. And I think we have great teachers in Minnesota, but I think what they're missing is a really rich toolkit of strategies to meet the unique needs of all the kids that come to the classroom.
And so how do you build on such a toolkit?
You get them sharing. You find where they're able to do it, and then you get them sharing. You have to be systemic about it and strategic so that you are finding those bright spots, you're recognizing it, and you're incentivizing it. It costs a lot of money for a teacher to share their best practice. And teachers are a little humble too. They don't want to, be seen as the great teacher, because all teachers really work together collaboratively. There's not one real teacher who's responsible for teaching reading. We all teach reading. So it's really a collaborative environment, and where you have that synergy working in schools is where you really have excellence happening.
Commissioner, we're almost out of time, but you brought up the magic word, money. Let's talk a little bit about that as much as you can. Given the fluid nature of the negotiations right now, can teachers work with what they have if the resolution isn't found by the time the legislature, by the time the special session is called, or by the time a potential government shutdown happens?
Teachers can work with what they have, and they've been doing it for the past 8 years. I can't remember a time that we weren't cutting. And it's just it's really difficult. It's absolutely difficult not to do with more money. We are not even at 2003 funding levels. To get to 2003 funding levels, we would need to raise the per pupil formula by $633. And you know, in the current proposal from the legislative side, it's only $20 that they want to raise the so to be short that amount of money and every year cutting, I think really cuts services, it cuts advanced placement programs, it cuts intervention services, it cuts services for kids who don't speak English well. I mean, and there's also a cut being proposed for students with disabilities. So there's a certain amount of intervention and support systems that need to be in place if you do want to close gaps. The status quo of funding and the status quo of strategies isn't going to get us there.
Are you optimistic that a resolution can be found?
I am optimistic. I've been optimistic the entire time. I have always been able to find a way at the table for people to come together around kids. And if we can put kids first and we can keep thinking about children first, no doubt we'll come up with a good solution.
Okay, Commissioner Cassellius, thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
She chairs the Senate Education Committee, and she joins us now to give us her perspective on the budget negotiations currently going. Senator Jen Olson, thank you for joining us on Capitol Report.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's begin with the latest proposal that was introduced on Monday by the GOP leadership to the governor, specifically with education. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, it focused on the priorities, and I think it was accommodating the governor's interest in putting some more funds in education, as well as public safety and the courts, our key responsibility constitutionally. And so how could one complain? Actually, education has been treated very well in terms of not being expected to make major cuts. Having said that, one should also be aware of the $5 billion shortfall. You know, you hear them talking about 3.6 instead of 5, because that's because 1.4 billion is already being carried by education by not reversing the shift in payment schedule, and that is with the agreement of the school districts. They would prefer to carry it rather than have it, either have it paid back on a one-time basis, but also they would rather have it come back as the statute now allows.
Okay, listen, you just focused on priorities briefly there. Let's talk about the priorities. The GOP compared with the DFL, compared with the governor, what are the priorities for each concerning education? Because generally speaking, education is considered a priority for everyone. Just how they go about it is slightly different. How challenging is that for you then, as the chair of the committee, to try to find agreement on what these priorities are and how to fund them?
Well, I think the challenge is because some of the same words and language is used by everybody. But that can mean different things, or it does not always address what some of the real challenges are.
Can you give me a specific?
Yes, I will. We can talk about funding education, and there's an effort to at least keep them whole. We have not been able to have significant growth overall in funding, although there are about $470 million that's additional dollars that is going to education that will accommodate additional student load and additional special ed needs and that type of thing. We also have backfilled for the one-time stimulus money, and that's so totally already there's about $900 million in state funds between the two biennia invested in education. So that does not constitute a cut. The challenges are in recognition that we have a system of funding now and structure in our system that looking forward is not financially sustainable. And so how do we work towards some reforms that will keep the system sustainable, but also while recognizing the changing demands on education for improving student achievement and closing the achievement gap. That's one of the reasons that I've focused for the last number of years on literacy, and reading by third grade, because when it gets right down to it, you know, the kids that are needing remedial in college, it always goes back to reading and math. And so the reading and math areas are ones that we should be taking a good hard look at how we lay the foundation. And that's what our focus has been in terms of the literacy, and that has been picked up by foundations and others. And I think there's a real crusade to get to reading proficiency by third grade for all students. There may be a small fraction that cannot learn, but in the 90+% can. And so that's where I would like to focus both some of the rewards as well as the incentives and the professional development, so that our teachers are equipped with the tools to, in fact, achieve that.
And I'd like to go a little bit further with that question and ask you something that I did ask Commissioner Cassellius as well. Given that in her opinion, early childhood is the best way to conquer the literacy issues, my question is, are there going to be some students who are currently in 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade who might fall through the cracks here as teachers, as legislators try to implement policy and curriculum to get students up to speed on reading? Is there going to be a generation that might fall through the cracks, or do you think that they can also be taught accordingly so that they do become proficient in reading?
We already have a generation that's been falling through the cracks, and that's the concern, and it needs to stop. And that's why that early childhood through 3rd grade is critical, because that's the focus should be the focus of instruction, is gaining those tools and those skills that they will need for every course that they pursue and into adulthood. You never quit learning, and you learn often through the written word. And so that's a critical area. I don't think the early childhood is a silver bullet. It can be a positive. We've got some positive things going in it now, and I know there's more that we can do, and we should do it thoughtfully. But we were planning in our bill, in the Senate bill, and it's carried through in the bill that was vetoed, investing more in the reading corps, tripling the amount of money that we invest in that, which brings tutors into the classroom. That and its leverage is about $3.50 for every dollar that we invest, and it brings tutors into the classroom that are trained in these kinds of approaches that actually can help young people gain more than a year's worth of reading skill level in a year's worth of time. And so at any point in those times, if we have the appropriate interventions and identify those needs, we can achieve that.
Senator Olson, let's talk a little bit about the education policy bill. Were you surprised that it was vetoed by the governor?
I was hoping that it wouldn't. And yes, I was a little surprised, because I think there were a number of areas that it kind of sent a message that there isn't a strong support for charter schools. There's some important provisions in there for charter schools, for innovation that has been initiated by the school districts and school administrators of allowing them some of the flexibility that's given to charter schools, districts combining together to propose in a pilot study of how they might make this work for some improved results. And a lot of control by both in terms of the application process and the selection process by the commissioner, but that apparently became a very big stumbling block. And yet they weren't asking for any money to do it. And it was an opportunity for some innovation from within. Most innovation doesn't come from within a system. It comes from outside. And so that was a refreshing thing. It would have been interesting to put to the test and see if people could in fact generate some significant change from within.
Madam Chair, we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you, with things at the legislature so fluid, anticipating a special session, a potential government shutdown, how are school districts planning, preparing, dealing with the fluid nature?
I'm not sure of what they are doing, but the school districts aren't in as bad shape as others. At July 15th, there is a standing appropriations for schools. And if there's somebody here to write the checks, they will continue to receive money. And if we have not resolved things, the shift will in fact go away. And so the shift back of payments will immediately start to increase. So dollar-wise, our school districts are probably going to be in better shape than other dimensions of government.
Okay, Senator Jen Olson, thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
As Minnesotans head to the polls in 2012, they will likely have a say in a significant piece of election reform. A bill requiring Minnesota voters to present a photo ID at the polls will likely be on the ballot. This group of lawmakers is supporting a constitutional amendment that would require a photo ID before one could vote. A similar bill passed the legislature but was vetoed by the governor.
He did not reciprocate by signing the bill into law, which was a disappointment. And by doing so, he kind of ignored the 80% of the public that has been recently polled that say they want a voter ID bill.
And I will grant you that polls show broad support for the concept of a photo ID. I think the real question is if people actually understand what that does to people's ability to vote, the burden that they're placing on seniors especially to vote, whether that broad support remains.
Senator Scott Newman joins me now to talk more about his bill. Thank you for joining us today.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.
Senator, let's begin with the intent of the bill. Although the language may not have been crafted at this point, do you hope for it to mirror the bill that was sent on and vetoed to the governor this past session?
Well, I don't know whether it will mirror the bill that was vetoed or not, because obviously the governor vetoed it, and I was not the chief author of that bill, although I was a co-author. But having said that, the intent of the bill that I just introduced was to allow the people in the state of Minnesota to vote on whether or not they want their Constitution to contain a provision which will require a voter ID. And by that, it's to require people to prove who they are and where they reside or what their primary residence is, and simply to protect the integrity of our election system. That is my intent. What ultimately will, in terms of a bill that will go to the governor for his signature, at this point I really can't comment on because I simply don't know.
Okay. Let me ask you then, Representative Ryan Winkler was one of the critics who continues to contend to this point that the elderly, disabled, and college students are just a few groups that would be harmed by this legislation. So what's your response to that?
My response is I do not agree with that. I disagreed with Representative Winkler and others when they have brought this up in the past, when we argued it on the Senate floor. I disagreed with it. I will continue to disagree with it. The extent of voter fraud, I honestly don't know. I can't say. I can tell you that I have information in my files from my constituents and others that make allegations of voter fraud. Particularly up in, I got a number of contacts from, I believe it was Otter Tail County, where they were very concerned about voter fraud. I personally have been contacted, and I believe every legislator has probably got some story that they can relate as to the issue of voter fraud, particularly in the nursing homes. So the bill that the governor vetoed did contain, you know, protections for students and the elderly and the poor and the homeless. But in my way of thinking, our constitutional right to vote is probably the most paramount constitutional right that we have, because with it, we have the ability to change, repeal, amend, to make things better for us. But without the right to vote, a meaningful vote now, then I think we put all of us in jeopardy. And so along with that very important constitutional right, I think there also comes an element of personal responsibility. And to require people to prove who they are and prove where they reside so that we know their vote is legitimate, I don't think is too much to ask.
Would you like to include a provision, if you were crafting the bill at this moment? The bill that went to the governor did have a provision where the state would provide those IDs for people who could legally vote but maybe couldn't afford an ID. would you like to have that provision as well?
I believe, I could be wrong on this, but I believe that would be a legal requirement as outlined by the courts. And so the short answer is yes. I believe any bill that goes to the governor will have that provision, and it will be funded. And there's going to be a number of different documents that could be used for purposes of a voter ID. But for that very small population, and I honestly believe it's a small population, that don't have proper identification, then the state of Minnesota will provide that for them at no cost.
Why take this issue to the voters?
It's important. I've already indicated it's in my opinion, the single most important constitutional right that we have. We also have an issue in the last 2 election cycles. We've gone through mandatory recounts. We have got an issue that 75 to 80% of the people polled say that this is an important issue and that they're in favor of it. So why did I pick it up? I believe it's a very important issue to be resolved in the state of Minnesota. I believe it's important to protect the integrity of our election systems.
And you stated in that news conference that it is your intent to bring this up in the next legislative session as a bill. So why introduce it now via a press conference? Because
the governor just vetoed the voter ID bill. And the voter ID bill that he just vetoed was, in my opinion, a very good bill. As I've indicated, I was a co-author on it. I was also sat on the conference committee on that bill. The details of that bill, the one person who really knows it well is Representative Kiffmeyer. But from everything that I saw in that bill, it covered all of the concerns of those who say we are disenfranchising people. And I just don't believe that we are. In point of fact, I think that every time somebody casts a vote that they shouldn't be, you just, by operation of that illegitimate vote, you disenfranchise somebody else.
Do you hope to use the time between now and next session to perhaps educate the public, the other 20 to 25% who might be against this legislation, on what you consider the pluses?
Well, that question was asked of me in the press conference, and I'm going to answer it the same way. I personally have no intentions of taking the time necessary to mount some kind of a program to convince people on this. What others may or may not do, I have no control over. But I personally, speaking just as this senator, no, I am not. My primary concern from this moment on is to try and figure out what to do with our budget crisis.
Okay, Senator Scott Newman, we will of course track your legislation next session. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's going to wrap up this week's Capitol Report from all of us at Senate Media Services. I'm Julie Bartkey. Thank you for watching.